Increasingly, there are concerns on the business model that underpins the digital world. There is now an established thinking that the big tech, which includes Google, Facebook, are spawning a new variant of capitalism, surveillance capitalism. Surveillance capitalism works by providing free services that billions of people cheerfully use, enabling the providers of those services to monitor the behavior of those users in astonishing detail, often without the explicit consent. This activity is often carried out by companies that provide us with free online services such as search engines Google and social media platforms like Facebook. These companies collect and scrutinize our online behaviors, likes, dislikes, searches, social networks, purchases, to produce data that can be further used for commercial purposes. And it is often done without us understanding the full extent of the surveillance. Such thinking has often resulted in a tech clash from time to time. And whether is the big tech betraying us? Well, the fact of the matter remains that we can't do much without the big tech too. For instance, an unprecedented pandemic like this saw the increasing role of community groups on Facebook coming to the fore. For this dispatch of the future of, we get into a freewheeling chat with Ajit Mohan, Vice President and Managing Director at Facebook India, to know more about the consumption pattern of users at the world's largest social media network, the regulatory ire, future of news, lessons learned from India, the investment in geo platforms, and so on.
Let's begin with the conversation. The elephant in the room right now is the entire narrative in the conversation about COVID-19. The newsrooms are flooded with that. I did have a look at the report as to what the world's largest social media network has to say about the consumption patterns of Indians during the pandemic. And I think the one overarching theme that really emerged was that how online communities have helped people sail through the pandemic. But honestly, my first reaction, the first blush looking at those findings was that it's not necessarily surprising, right? During moments of fear or when the pandemic or such extraordinary situations happen, people tend to get closer. It's just a very human trait to sort of be more inward looking when you are operating in an environment of fear. So I'm not necessarily sure the fact that Facebook has come up with this report that we were all guided by online communities is essentially path breaking. I would want to understand from you, perhaps in this conversation, that if you were to give me 2 or 3 key traits that how this pandemic has changed business, culture, communication for generations to come, what are the 3 revelations that the world's largest social media network can tell us?
Yeah, thank you, Srija. Great to be here. I think the report that you're referring to for your audience, one of the things that it highlighted, and that headline is quite stark, that in 11 of the 15 countries that were surveyed, including India, the largest proportion of people said that the most important group or community in their lives is primarily online. And I think in many ways, Srija, that sets the context for your question about that at a time, especially in India, as we are seeing the second spike in the pandemic, and the situation is pretty grim in a lot of different parts around the world. I think your question is, what have the last 12 months really done in terms of fundamental shifts in behavior? I think let me answer in terms of saying, highlighting what has not changed. And I think it again kind of goes to the headline from this research work that we did. What hasn't changed is that people around the world, independent of countries, independent of the economic or cultural context, continue to rely on communities that are important to them. That's an essential part of people's lives. Being part of groups, being part of interest groups, being part of community groups. The only big change is increasingly a lot of it is online. And I think you correctly pointed out that it's definitely been accelerated by what we have seen in the world in the last 12 months. And to your question, I would call out three things. One, there is clearly a shift in behavior where all of us are increasingly more comfortable having a large part of our lives online. In many ways, due to different versions of the lockdown that we had in different parts of the world, many of us were forced to go online or forced to live online. But that trend has been in place for a long time, where a lot of our followership of interest to this report, our sense of belonging in communities and groups was shifting online, and that has gotten accelerated in the last 12 months. So that's clearly one. I think the second part is the importance of virtual presence. We saw that in a lot of behaviors. We saw that a massive growth across our platforms, that as the world shut down last year, there was this deep desire to connect with your friends or your family or with others around the world at a time when we could not be physically in the same rooms, and in many ways that continues. And I think people were getting on, a Zoom call like this, were getting on rooms on Facebook, WhatsApp video calls. Creators were doing broadcasts on Instagram. I think there's such a deep desire for people to connect with each other that one of the big shifts in technology that we're going to see is the rapid evolution of what does it mean to have presence virtually. And in many ways, I think we were headed towards a world in which AR and VR were going to play a more important role. I think that's gotten accelerated because you've just unlocked this appetite for virtual presence. And I think we've barely scratched the surface, right? I mean, it's great to have a video call, but imagine a world in which you put on a headset and we all can feel like we are in the same room, engaging with each other, where some of the constraints of not being physically in the same space go away. And the third thing, I think, Srija, obviously what we have seen is this is going to impact commerce as well in a very material manner, right? It's because a lot more people are online around the world. But again, I think because of some of the constraints that were imposed, we are seeing that people have more comfort with discovering products and services online, shopping online. And I think that acceleration is going to get even more entrenched over the next few months and years.
I also sort of have another question, as a follow-up to the survey that you did. I think it's a pretty interesting finding, which said that the online community groups will have become significantly more important in India compared to rest of the world. I was wondering, are there any particular reasons driving this? We, of course, alluded to the fact that the entire reason of digital transformation has accelerated in India and what it really means to be online. So I want to understand that, why do you think the community groups will have a larger role in India compared to other parts of the world?
Yeah, Srija, I think a couple of things to call out, and I think you alluded to it. There are a couple of numbers that stand out for this work that we were doing, largely looking at, Facebook groups around the world. How do people use those groups? What is their sense of belonging with the group? And just to set the context, about 1.8 billion people around the world use Facebook groups every month. And when we started probing this and trying to understand what the underlying drivers for, a few things stood out for in India. And just to call out a couple, one of the things, in the rest of the world, around 31% of people said they found a great sense of belonging to their group. In India, the number was 43.8. It's, when you asked people about the importance of online communities in their lives, about 99.5% said they were significantly more important compared to other groups. In India, that number was 38.8. So you do see a world in which communities are pretty important anyway to everyone. But even in that context, we are seeing that it's even more so true in India, which is the point that you just called out, Srija. And to your question of what explains it, I mean, for me, it's two or three things, Srija. One, clearly we have gone through a period of rapid digitization over the last 4 or 5 years, where an extraordinarily large number of people have come online, right? More than 700 million people who have affordable access to high quality internet in India. That number was probably less than 50 million 5 years ago. So you definitely have the context of India where massive transformation is happening, just in terms of a very large number of people who are coming online for the first time, for whom data is not just affordable, it's also good quality internet. And they're recognizing that there are lots of tools that unleash the ability to add value to their lives. So that's clearly one context. Second is, I think as a country, we have a history of having deep bonds within community groups way before the internet. And I think what you see in countries around the world is that a lot of the social code and fabric that pre-exists the internet tend to start getting imported into the internet, with, of course, the enablement happening that you're not constrained a lot by geography, right? You're able to connect with a lot more people. You're able to not just connect with people earlier, which may have been limited to your physical community or a local context. You now have the ability to connect with interest groups, and that interest group can be anywhere in the world. But that's the other thing to call out, that I think this is a country which has a history of deep connects and bonds, and frankly, active, sort of effort by groups to help each other. And I think in many ways that's all gotten amplified in the last 12 months. One of the things that we have seen is the presence of a lot of groups that have come up in India over the last 12 months, going back to March and April of last year. And I think just given what we are seeing in the last couple of weeks with the second spike in cases, I think all of these groups are going to do all of the fabulous work that they did last year in full force again. I think a great example is Caremongers in India, right? I think which has been renamed Humankind Global now, which started with the idea that they will try and provide food and medicine to people, especially the more vulnerable and older population, whose family members may not be physically located in the same city. And I think that's the power of the history of communities helping each other in India, and that's coming online. I think the third thing to call out is the demographics. I think we keep talking about it as a country. We are a very young country. Most of our population is below 30 years old. In fact, below 26 years old is a significant percentage of our population. And these are people who are recognizing the power of digital, not just to transform their own lives, but also to show up and be helpful to each other, especially at the time of a crisis.
That was sort of meaningful, Ajit. Sort of, I think it's one last question on your survey, and if you will, I think we can get on to the larger conversation. I think that's very fascinatingly, I think one thing that's really stood out for me was that the group administrators said that it's welcoming differences of opinion. I think that was a refreshing statement coming from Facebook. And there are millions of group administrators, as the data shows clearly. And it's clearly a very hopeful sign just in the kind of world that we live in right now. But how does that really square off with the very significant criticism that social media is used by bad actors to create hate and divide people? And this has significant negative effect on policy and society. And further, sort of, how does it reconcile with research that shows social media, including Facebook, is creating filter bubbles with people of the same opinions, reinforcing their own views, adding to societal tensions?
I think, Srija, so many questions packed there. So let me kind of try and unpack and address different parts of it. I think one, no surprise, and something that we deeply believe here, because We see that every day, and we see that in the data every day. And if anything, I think the last 12 months amplified it. Is predominantly people on our platforms, whether it's Facebook or Instagram or WhatsApp, use it for good. Use it to start a business, to connect with their friends and family, to build followership, and more than anything else to this conversation, use it to build communities that are important for them, for which, as the survey showed, there's an extraordinary sense of belonging. It's a positive energy. And I think that's what we see. The vast number of people on our platform and the vast number of actions on our platform, whether in a public social media space or a private messaging space, are people going about their lives, wanting to make their lives better and wanting to make the lives of others better. But as in everything in the world, when you do have the emergence of new technologies that can unleash tools that are forced for good, that empower people or that connect people, there will be a minority of actors who will want to do harm, who will indulge in behavior that we transparently call out as unacceptable on our platforms. And I think we are aligned. We are aligned in the agenda of limiting the ability of these actors to do harm. I think in the last few years, the company has invested in safety and security disproportionately. We have more than 35,000 people who work on the agenda of safety and security. Our policies are transparent in terms of what we do. And we've also invested a lot, Srija, in systems and technology that limit the ability of harmful actors to do harm and harmful content to radiate. I think the second part of this, and you know, the one thing to call out there is, and I've said this before, is that I think when you look at stakeholders around the world, including democratic governments, who call out that companies like ours, technology companies and social media platforms should do more, we've always been vocal that we are aligned with that agenda. And we recognize that even as we're doing a lot, it is never enough. And we approach this with the mindset that we should continue to do more and more. And that's what we do, whether it's in investing in systems or processes or policies or people. To the second part of your question, Srija, on polarization, I actually think there is now enough research, and you know, between in the last 2 or 3 years, there has been enough research done at Pew, at USC, that has gone into understanding the role of echo chambers, the role of political polarization, and the role of social media in that polarization. And I think the points of view that come out are quite nuanced, especially even when you look at what is the polarization among non-internet users. And forget even, you know, people who don't use social media or Facebook or Instagram or WhatsApp, but people who may not be even on the internet, because that's a great way to understand how much of this is triggered by the internet or by platforms like us. And the research does show that the simplistic argument that attributes polarization to social media is not true. Having said that, I think we definitely as a company see that we have a huge role to play in making sure that the platforms are used for the right conversations. Even when there is differences of opinion, it's done in a respectful manner. I think one of the things we are proud of is being an enabling platform for points of view from all ends of the spectrum. But to try and make sure that that conversation is respectful. I think one thing to call out here is, going back to a few years ago, one of the things that we actually did, even though at that point it came at the cost of lower engagement on our platform, is to pivot our framework to conversations that were more meaningful, right? Rather than proliferation of public news that in that context may have been considered more polarizing. So that's the only other thing that I would call out, that where we have had to make hard choices, even if it has meant it has come at the cost of engagement. And this is one of the criticisms that we see as a company, that you have an incentive in driving polarization because it's helpful to engagement. The truth could not be further. I think we actually believe that we benefit from positive conversations on the platform. We benefit from misinformation not radiating on the platform, not just in terms of the people on our platform, but even our economic model benefits from it. So our interests are quite aligned with the interests of ensuring that even when there is differences of opinion, the conversations are respectful. And I think, if anything, what we've shown in the past, Srija, is where we have had to make choices, we have chosen to do the right thing, even if it has come at the cost of engagement in the short term.
That's sort of pretty meaningful coming from you, Ajit, and sort of reiterating that positive conversations have actually helped the platform. But tell me one thing, that this entire narrative, which keeps sort of springing time and again about surveillance capitalism and the role of big tech in that, which really is at the heart of it, and the betrayal by big tech. I think some of those conversations are more popular in the Valley, in the markets of US and the UK. Do you think that the way you are building out Facebook in India, you have a distinct advantage, just given that that noise is not that much more aggravated in these parts? And the second part of my question really is that you also have a very powerful ally in Reliance Industries. And does that make your presence in India much better on those counts?
I would separate the answers to the two questions, Srija, because the answers are actually in different buckets, and let me explain both. On the first one, I actually think the scrutiny on tech companies is global. It's not just in the West. It's everywhere, including in India. And as I've said in the past, in many ways, I think it's entirely fair for all stakeholders, including the government, to put a spotlight on tech companies and ask the question, in the light of rapid changes in technology, how are we making sure that societies like us, including in India, are able to leverage the benefits of rapid technology innovation to transform our lives for the better, but equally make sure that companies like ours are doing everything we can to limit harm. And I think it's about making sure that we can do both, right? Making sure that the canvas is expansive and permissive to allow the kind of rapid transformation in the economy that we have seen in India in the last 5 years. And in many ways, the reality is, for all the achievements that we have made, for all the dramatic progress that we have made in the last 5 years, especially in expanding access to the internet, and then increasingly, as we have seen in the emergence of new models. I mean, there is so much enterprise and entrepreneurship, Srija, as you know, covering the startup ecosystem well. Companies large and small are investing in ideas and investing capital to explore what are the models that can come out of India that address the scale of some of the most complex problems that we face in India, right? How do we provide access to education for all? How do we provide access to quality healthcare for all? How do we make sure that shopkeepers and small businesses benefit from digital as much as larger companies and established platforms? All of that means that we need to encourage companies to experiment and really innovate at the frontiers, while still making sure that there are clear rules that they operate with. And I've said this in the past. I think we are at a moment globally where we have seen 20-25 years of rapid innovation triggered by the internet. And in the beginning, there were not a lot of rules. There wasn't a lot of clarity about how fast could you go on the highways? What are the traffic lights? And in some form or the other, stakeholders, including governments, are all in the middle of an active conversation about what those traffic lights are. And I think that's a good thing. And we see ourselves as a stakeholder in the conversation, right? We have learnings to share. We understand that there will be scrutiny on us that comes from the work that we do. And a lot of it is because I think everyone is aligned on the interest that you want to maximize the potential of unleashing these technologies for good, while still, to one of your earlier questions, making sure that platforms like ours do everything we can to limit the harm that may come from a minority of people or groups. I think to the second question, Srija, about our investment in geo platforms, you're absolutely right that we see that as a critical partnership for the future. We are excited about the partnership for multiple reasons. One, we made the investment a year ago in April because we saw in Jio a company that shared our mission of finding ways to connect the world, right? I think we have spoken a lot about how quickly transformation has happened in India in the last 5 years. And I honestly think Jio deserves a lot of credit for triggering that revolution by introducing an affordable 4G model that essentially changed the landscape of digitization in India. And I think that was the starting point. We saw two companies who were aligned on that mission. In the context of that, I mean, we did think that there was possibility for the two companies to come together and invest in the ecosystem in India that would be a win, not just for the two companies, but for the ecosystem as a whole. And I think the partnership that was announced, and we're continuing to work on that between JioMart and WhatsApp, is an example of that. At the core of it, it could be a very enabling tool for the 60 million small businesses in India, especially the Kirana stores, to come online. Essentially structure and reduce the friction of a behavior that all of us know already exists, that people are using WhatsApp to connect with their local store, whether it's the local grocery store or the local farmer. We're all messaging our store and saying, hey, do you mind sending something that I want? Do you have it? What is the price? It's happening today. I think we are saying if we are able to structure that, make it easier for people on WhatsApp to discover these stores, to discover what are they selling, what is the price, and essentially to make it easier to order, then it is a dramatic introduction of convenience for consumers in India. But equally importantly, or more importantly, it's a dramatic economic empowerment opportunity for the Kirana store, because this is the gateway to enter the online world and find mechanisms to increase their income. So we see this as a win-win. And frankly, we see if we are able to connect these dots, the multiplier opportunity for the ecosystem outside of the two companies will be enormous as well. And that's the nature of the partnership. We will definitely be looking to do things that are in both our interests, but invariably, we will be particularly focused on opportunities that are good for the ecosystem in India.
Okay, so you're sort of just taking further on that question, how has that partnership really come along? Give us some data there, and what are your expansion plans to sort of nurture that partnership going ahead?
I think no news to share there, Srija. As in most of these things, when you're doing big things, I think you have to be very thoughtful and make sure that you're investing the right amount of time and energy in making good things happen, and that's what we're in the middle of.
So, have you had any learnings there? Are you happy with that journey of partnership with Jio?
Of course, and I think there will be a moment to share the journey and share the learnings, as well as be even more overt about what are the specific mechanisms where other companies and the ecosystem, especially smaller businesses, can benefit.
Okay, tell me one thing about that, Ajit, in terms of your India platform, monetization on the India platforms, how is Facebook India going behind that? Give us sort of some sense and color there.
As we think about the long term, Srija, the opportunity that we see is in a country where there is so much transformation happening on the back of more and more people getting access to digital, being empowered through the tools that they have access to, and then companies unleashing newer models and innovation. We believe that we have a role to play here for the long term, because with the platforms that we have, with the nature of these platforms, we believe that we are a big part of that transformation. But I think you were also asking a very specific question about our economic model and how are we doing? And I'm very sincere that every day we spend as much energy on these first two things that we spoke about, and a lot of our conversations internally are how do we show up and be helpful in the middle of this pandemic. We also believe that our economic model of advertising, right? I think if you zoom out and look at the company, these platforms have been built and they're free to use, not just for consumers, but businesses as well. And I'll give you a number that I think will give you the context of our work. There are 200 million businesses around the world who use our family of apps, Srija. Only 10 million of them are advertisers on Facebook and Instagram, which means the vast number of companies or businesses who use us for free without paying any money to us, and that's fine. We are as invested in building tools that make us useful for those 190 million businesses as we are for those 10 million advertisers. And of course, I think our belief is that as people understand how to use our platforms and as they themselves grow and as they have access to more resources, they will find that advertising on Facebook is a great mechanism to expand the followership of their products and services, to find new consumers, invariably to expand nationally and globally. And that's sort of the last point to make here is our model of advertising is in particular oriented towards the particular economic context of India, where disproportionate part of the entrepreneurship will come from smaller businesses, newer startups. And on that, a couple of things to call out. One, we are very focused as a product in making sure that our tools are available. The tools that are available to our largest clients are also available to our smallest businesses, Srija. There is we don't see a distinction. And second, we believe that there's an opportunity in India, particularly when there is an explosion of entrepreneurship enabled by all the changes that we have seen in the internet, for us to lean in and invest to make sure there is awareness of those tools for the smaller businesses. We work with, we have what used to be physical programs earlier, which are online programs now, which essentially we open the doors to any business to understand how to leverage our platform. We work with the private equity and venture capitalists to make sure that their portfolio companies understand the power of the platforms and how to leverage them. And what we are finding and what we have seen an acceleration in the last year is companies are increasingly leveraging those tools to go not just national, but to go global, Srija, from day one. And that's the power of, I think, not just our economic model, but the particular context that we are in now.
That was sort of very meaningful. Ajit, tell me one thing, that how is the new user joining Facebook now different from the user of the yesteryears? Does the new user have different characteristics? I'm assuming that the new user comes from a more tier 2, tier 3 cities. Is he more of a knack in his orientation? And how are you adapting the Facebook India for that new user?
It's a great question, Srija. And there are, again, no surprise, I think there are many elements to this. I think the first one is that, at 700 million, the reality is internet has already gone deep into India, right? And even at 100 million, it was already rich in terms of geographic diversity and language diversity. I think I know sometimes we like to simplify and kind of say that, hey, we're suddenly seeing that it's a lot more vernacular than earlier. India has always been vernacular. I think for anyone, especially in media, knows that you hit the richness and diversity of India on languages and geographies pretty quickly, right? It's never just English. That was never the case, and I think that continues to be true for the internet as well. I think the second part to your question, we do see that there's a certain kind of journey that we see, and no surprise that I think invariably WhatsApp and Facebook and increasingly Instagram tend to be the first and the second and the third app on the phone, right? So I think in many ways we act as the gateway to the internet. I think what is changing dramatically, Srija, is people are moving from I'm using the internet for the first time. I'm using it for messaging. I get onto Facebook. I watch video, to experiencing the full portfolio of services, whether that includes payments or commerce or other transactions. I think what was a slower transition a few years ago is all happening in a crunched manner now. I think there is comfort with the internet. There's definitely familiarity because you're seeing people around you use a lot more of an unconstrained set of products and services. And that clearly is creating a massive virtuous cycle, which is, I think, setting the context for the explosive innovation that we are seeing. To your last question about how are we looking at it, I think we were always sort of doubled up on India, right? I think it is the largest country for Facebook and WhatsApp. So it's always played a particular role in how we think about our products. But that's been accelerated even more so in the last couple of years, where increasingly we are thinking about products or features that are launched in India, we learn from India, and then we expand around the world. I think Reels on Instagram is a great example of a product where India was one of the very early countries, was one of the first where we launched it, and one of the first where we had massive traction. Payments on WhatsApp. India was the first for payments on WhatsApp. So more and more, I think we are well oriented to the understanding that it's not just the scale of the internet usage in India. I think that would be reducing it to a very monochromatic fashion. It is the richness of the India internet, where there is diversity, there is depth, there is experimentation of models, where in many ways, India is at the spear end of innovation. And we're seeing that here as well, where we are trialing new products and features, finding traction here, and then taking it global. And I think we'll continue to play that role, even as we understand that part of our role, given our scale, Srija, is to play that role for others, right? I think the reality is, for a new startup, leveraging us to reach consumers in the state or in the country or increasingly globally, invariably is a very effective mechanism, right? There are very few barriers. The hurdle rate is very low. And I think companies are discovering that you can build global business models riding off the scale of Facebook and Instagram. And that's a role that we think is important as well, that we are essentially the launch pads for other companies to scale up. And that's a role that we take quite seriously as well.
Yeah, I think one can already see that in the lot of social commerce phenomenon, which definitely the Facebook and your allied platforms like WhatsApp and Instagram have really institutionalized. A lot of VC funding is going on social commerce space, which really has been labeled as the future of e-commerce. And I think you have spoken quite a bit on that. Given that I have you with me, Ajit, who is really somebody who's a veteran in the content, digital, partnership, platform space, and we began this entire narrative talking about the role of communities and how that is forging deeper and deeper in the wake of pandemic, and how it has always been there. So does that also is a great segue on what will be the future of news, if I were to ask you? I think that news going forward would be more community oriented. Instead of being very, very horizontal, there is perhaps sense and sanity catering to communities. And Facebook really has a deep love and hate relationship with publishers. That's a side note. And you understand the news phenomenon very well. But what do you think really is the future of news, where we are headed?
From my side, Srija, it's only been love. So I would be curious to understand the hate side of the equation. We work with a lot of news partners in the country, I think, in terms of trying to help them, leverage our platforms to build followership. I think at one level, no surprise that given the nature of our platforms and what we have seen and learned, Srija, and our own conviction, we do believe that when business models are organized around people, there is enormous power in it. I think you mentioned social commerce. I think you know that we have an investment in a company called Meesho. And part of the reason we made the investment was we thought there was a phenomenal opportunity to understand and affirm and learn from a company that had built a fairly unique in India model to foster female entrepreneurship by leveraging the power of communities and essentially building the ability for female entrepreneurs to sell to their friends and family leveraging WhatsApp. So we are, of course, big fans that communities can form the basis for innovation in all kinds of economic and social models. And Meesho is a great example of it. But to your question, Srija, on news, I do think we're seeing explosive innovation in news in India and around the world. Srija, your company is a big part of that. Your group is a big part of all kinds of experimentation on digital, many of which has worked out fabulously well. And I think that's going to continue to be the case. I'm not an expert in news, but I know that just like in other sectors, there's a lot of enterprise and innovation in India from news publishers, including from companies like yours. And I'm hoping that the role that Facebook can play is really as an ally for news publishers like yours, and figure out how we can further the agenda of innovation that you're driving and fostering.
Thanks, Ajit. That's really a lot of love for news publishers. When I mentioned hate, I was alluding to sort of what's really happening in other parts of the world, clearly. I want to understand from you, Ajit, that, if you were to give me 2 or 3 key challenges that you are facing as you're building out Facebook in India, what would those top 3 challenges be?
I think I would not frame it as a challenge as much as I think this complexity in terms of the many opportunities that we have, Srija, a lot of which you addressed through your questions, given the nature of our platforms, whether Facebook or Instagram or WhatsApp, how deeply they're immersed in the social fabric of India, given the big changes that we are seeing in the Indian internet ecosystem, and the explosion of innovation, including the rise of companies that are competing with us, right? I think we don't take it for granted that the success that we have had and the special role that we play in the lives of Indians, we don't take it for granted. It will continue to be extremely competitive. There will be new companies and new models that will very often be our partners, will very often leverage us, and will very often compete with us. So I think one of that is one context, right? Which is that we are in a space where there is a lot of innovation and competition, and we will have to keep raising the bar on the innovation of our own products to make sure that we are viable and we are able to continue the special place we have in India. That is one. I think the second one is, to what you said, at a time when there is rapid acceleration of behaviors in terms of the shift from offline to online in a country which has seen an enormous number of people come online, and an enormous number of people who will come online in the next few years. How do we make sure that we are being true to what I articulated, that we are being an ally for India's transformation, which means how do we show up to be an ally for our partners in India, for other companies, even as we are able to drive innovation ourselves and make sure that our products are evolving to address that. I think a great example is the role that we have played in the explosion of short form video and creators in India, right? And Reels on Instagram is a great example of that. One of the ambitions that we have, Srija, is to make sure that we play a role in creating a global superstar from India. We believe that's possible, right? When we see the explosion of innovation in the creator ecosystem, we see it possible. We know that these creators are building followership. We're thinking about how to come up with monetization models that make it easy for them to build great businesses, make it economically viable, and build thriving economic models from that. So there's so much, there's so many questions open in the canvas of opportunities. I think a lot of times it's not a challenge, but it's about where do you put your energy, right? Where do you invest the product energy and attention to make sure that we're working on areas where we can move the needle and truly be helpful to the ecosystem. And the last one is that to a lot of questions that you asked, we have to do all of this even as we address the questions around how are we leaning in as a company in terms of our policies, our investments in technology and people, to make sure that we limit the ability of harmful actors to use our platforms to do harm. So I think it is that, multifaceted equation that kind of becomes complex. We have to be thoughtful and nuanced, and we have to be at our best to make sure that we are getting all of this right, Srija, at the same time.
I think before I sort of let you go off, I have some quick rapid fire questions with you. What is Ajit Mohan Netflixing these days, or perhaps Hotstarring these days?
I think I have been watching IPL on Hotstar. I think, Srija, your allusion to my previous role, I mean, it was a moment of huge pride for me to have had the opportunity to build Hotstar, and I continue to be a big fan. The show that I'm watching now is The Serpent on Netflix, about Charles Shobraj. I don't know whether you know about him. There's an India Connect in a story. That's the show that I'm watching at the moment.
And what are you reading these days if you're getting time enough?
It's been more watching than reading, and I'm kind of embarrassed about it. I should find a way to get back to my reading habits.
Okay. What is the entire phenomenon about, Clubhouse and social audio? Do you think these are more fads or sort of here to stay? What is your personal sense?
Yeah, I'm on Clubhouse. I've kind of tried it a bit, and I think it's fantastic. I wouldn't dismiss anything new as a fad, right? I think we're at the moment when there is so much innovation happening on the internet, and the creation of models that, a year ago we wouldn't have thought about it, and then suddenly you find the utility and people are using it. And I think audio is one of them. I think there's explosive innovation around audio. I think it's a podcast like this. It's a model like Clubhouse, and I think we'll continue to see new models. And I think that's the reality is, I think it goes back to one of our conversations. I think there's such extraordinary competition on the internet today. And it's true even for companies like ours that have been around for a while, that may seem like it's entrenched and doing well. The reality is any innovation can come in and knock us off. And it just shows how competitive the space is.
Tell me one thing, that every leader has a way of thinking.
problem solving. So what is your mental mode of thinking? I would like to get a sneak peek into Ajit Mohan's mind here. How do you solve your toughest problems and challenges? What is it one quick way to sort of get around your mind, your mental mode of thinking?
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't thought of it that way, but I think I can share a principle that's been helpful to me is that um, especially as you age and you have exposure to more experience and learning, you want to make sure that you learn from them, right? Your ability to solve problems, as you mentioned, is invariably, influenced by all the learning that shows up as an intuitive insight or a point of view. But the one thing that I try and do is to kind of not have that learning overwhelm my response to new and complex problems. I think one of the gifts, and it becomes harder as you become older, is for all of us would be to remain militantly open, right? Not to assume that you've cracked this problem before, not to assume that you know the answer to this question. That's something that I try very hard to, that you want the benefit of all your learning, but you don't want that benefit of that learning to overwhelm to the point where you become closed. So I would say, militant sort of commitment to being open is definitely something that I try to do, and I encourage people that I work with to do. And one of the things that goes with it is, on any problem, approach it from first principles, right? Don't get to the answer too quickly. Break it down to sort of the heart of it and start solving it from the ground up, and you're more likely to get to a better answer if you do it that way.
Who is your hero, Jeff Bezos or Musk?
I think both of them. I think both of them are enormous leaders. I think who have shown impact in very different fields. I mean, their approach is very different, clearly. But having read both of their stories and enough about sort of the companies that they've built, so much to learn and admire in both of them.
Okay, my last question to you, Ajit, really the highest point in your career till now, something which you'll never forget. What would that really be?
I haven't looked at it sort of as a career as sort of a scoring sort of vehicle, right? I mean, I haven't looked at it. I think I've looked at it more as you get this extraordinary opportunity and privilege to have all these experiences, and I think I've benefited from having had the opportunity to work in different parts of the world and be exposed to different problems. And I think that ARC has been a huge privilege. And of course, I think to one of your earlier questions, the opportunity to build and grow Hotstar was definitely one of them. And I think the work that I'm doing in Facebook today with leadership of a company that has services like Facebook and Instagram and WhatsApp that are so immersed in India's fabric, and having the opportunity to think through how can we show up and have impact in a country like India, I think it's massive. So all of these experiences, but I would call out those two in particular, Srija.
Okay, thank you so much, Ajit. I think we had a lovely conversation. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And thank you so much for your time and energy to this. I'm sure our readers and watchers will benefit hugely from this. Thank you so much, Ajit. Thank you for your time and energy.
No, great having this conversation, Srija. Great to spend time with you. Thank you.